Might look like I'm nervous because I am. Just a couple of things. I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible. So that really is down to how you guys also engage. So I've got all the answers on the slide. That's not the point. And also one thing, I sometimes mumble. So if I start mumbling,
you're mumbling. Just joking.
Exactly. So if I start mumbling, then just let me know. Okay. And sometimes I get really excited. I'm really passionate about this field, and the pitch of my voice goes really high. So if you think that you're listening to a Dell CD, stop me. Even though you think it's good, just stop me, and I'll try and bring my pitch down to a normal talk. Okay. So a bit about me, as Lime said. And before anybody asks, my beard really is as soft as it looks.
How do you do that, Paul?
Well, it's a combination of Buffelsfontein, Bartwell, and Bonafide palm oil. You can ask Christy about that. Okay, so yeah, I got into digital forensics when I was watching a program. It used to be called, I think it was called, first it was called Forensic Files, and then it was called Medical Detectives, or vice versa. I think it was first Medical Detectives. And I saw a case about the bind, torture, kill, Dennis Radner, bind, torture, kill murderer that wreaked havoc from the 70s through to the 90s when he was caught. And he was caught through metadata. They analyzed the metadata of a file on a Stiffy drive, 3.5 inch Stiffy drive, and they saw that the person who had edited the file, it was at a certain church. They looked up whose name's Dennis at the church, and then they found him that using Encase, which is a forensic software tool. They could just, but you didn't even need a forensic tool to analyze the metadata. You just right-click properties, and the metadata's there. I'm not going to be touching on metadata tonight. If I rush through this stuff, then we do have another presentation on metadata. But I love metadata. That's just what it is. Lime actually got me into digital forensics at UCT. He did the course before I did, and he told me how much he enjoyed it. So that's why I actually went into it. And yeah, as he says, I've gone up to my master's. I'm probably crazy enough to do my doctorate, but at this stage I'd probably like to spend some more time on my music. Okay, so let's jump in. I'll just show you what the agenda is. Okay, so we're going to go through what is forensics. If you have any questions, please put up your hand. This is the kind of flow of where we're going to. There's there's nice speakers here. We've got a nice video which actually ties all this stuff up. It's actually from a British comedy duo. It's a sketch that they did. But I think it sums up exactly what we're going to be covering here. So that's why I'm gonna show it. I'm really nervous. Okay, so what is forensic? The history of forensics as a science, history of computer forensics and how it evolved into digital forensics, computer-based electronic evidence, scientific method, CSI effect, chain of custody, and just a quick overview of the digital forensic process. Just as a matter of fact, who does forensics or is exposed to this type of stuff? Any sysadmins? You do it?
Purely, I've been doing it for a while. I don't get paid for it, but it's doing it until I master's in the UK. And then we here and help some people prepare these things.
Okay, cool. Fantastic. Help me out if I say anything wrong. Oh, please. Okay, so I really want it to be interactive. Yeah, fun as well. Okay, so let's jump in. So what is forensics? Anybody? Doesn't have to be the right answer.
Who did what?
Who did what? Yeah, who did what? And then, but more important, you need to be able, as forensics, if you look at the definition, what it's defined as, the Oxford Dictionary defines it as, it's based off Latin, forensis, which means for the court, or, open public, open court public. Okay, so that's what it means. So that's forensic is a science. So something about forensic, and we'll probably go over this a couple of times. It needs to firstly be reliable and it needs to be valid. Okay, so that's what makes a science. A science is anybody can take the same amount of, or the same evidence, and they should come to exactly the same conclusion. If they come to a different conclusion, then you need to understand why that happens. Okay, yeah, if it looks like I'm reading from the slides. Okay, so evidence collected, it should be used following scientific principles, and that's where we're moving today, going through the history, and then obviously getting to where computer forensics is actually a science, as we know today. Okay, so the history of forensics, it goes back, and you'll see this in the video, it goes back to the cavemen, where they used to protect their home and their family. So this is not something new. It wasn't called forensics back then. On the previous slide you saw it went back to the 17th century. Okay, so what type of forensics are you familiar with? If you've seen it on TV, just a couple of examples. Anyone? CSI? Well, what type of forensics from CSI?
Fingerprints.
Fingerprints, yes. DNA, hair. Okay, exactly. I mean, that's exactly what it is. There's loads of different disciplines, and a lot of them are in the last 200 odd years. Francis Galton, I'm just going to whiz through these. So, I mean, if you want to stop me, then there's obviously blood type grouping before DNA came along. Ballistics, and document examination. Well, for the life of me, I can't remember what type of forensic document examination is called, but I'll figure it out. It's been bothering me the whole day. There's a name for it. Okay, so Hans Gross, this guy is often referred to as the founder of the field of criminalistics. What he did was he took all these principles, or all these different types of forensics, and he put them together when looking at a case, and it's completely, right? Okay, so, and then in 1932, the FBI set up a lab. Everybody knows J. Edgar Hoover. I won't go into that discussion by itself. Whether he was a good guy, bad guy, whatever. That was his mom, we can't do that. Okay, then DNA. This is probably one of the biggest breakthroughs that we're all familiar with. We've always thought that it's been around for years. I mean, it only goes back to 1985. And it's hard to believe that. Before 1985, there's no such thing as DNA. A guy called Alex Jeffries. He from Leicester University. It was used to catch a criminal who killed two teenagers. He also did a lot of cases with immigration before it was used for the first criminal case. And as a result, Colin Pitchfork was found guilty for the murders, and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was actually eligible for parole last year. I don't think he got it. It's not safe to be released. Okay. So the history of computer forensics. Any idea of how far computers go back and where forensics started? Or just throw it a number. 70s? 60s? Yeah?
1989?
1989. Yeah, well, it's a bit before that. But yeah, it dates back to the 50s and 60s. And a lot of people in this room are coders. It still happens today. Coders sharing code amongst themselves. And this is what was one of the big problems, is no one could actually come up with what defines computer crime. Okay, so the first recorded crime actually goes back to 1958. It was a non-guilty verdict. First criminal prosecution was 1966. There were two cases. The first one was an employee altering bank records. The second one was some poor guy called Hancock. He was found guilty of copying 58 different programs from Texas Instruments. And then from here, this is really when it started to become more of a science. They would start to look at having definitions and stuff. So Hancock versus the state. Hancock's going to be like this first guy that Microsoft really goes after for copyright. So, but you'll have your name up on slides and stuff. So not too bad. I'll never be able to own a car or house again, but that's not. Okay, so the court ruled that computer programs fell under all writings. Okay, so any written documents, and that's what they found it as. And then classification. Right. Sorry, I just moved. Okay. And then that was argued that it was too broad, and obviously just approach to protect people's property. Okay, so we're getting more to your date there, 1987. Okay, so Don Parks, he's pretty clever. He's one of the leading forensic examiners in the world. In 1979, this is obviously the evolution, so it's going to be going through a lot. Okay, so, oops. So computer crime is described as illegal computer abuse. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily it means that the computer has been used to commit the crime. Okay, computer-related crime is defined as a broader term, and it means knowledge of a computer to commit the crime. And lastly, computer abuse is defined as an intentional act where one or more persons intentionally made use of a computer to attempt to gain access that resulted or could have resulted in loss to victims. Okay, so this was obviously trying to come up with a term that everyone could agree on, and then we carry on. Okay, so in the United Kingdom, they defined any fraudulent behavior connected with a computerized system as intent to gain dishonest advantage. So hacking, altering bank records. Okay, any questions?
What are those examples you said on the right now? So
Which examples?
you said now.
All right, well, such as hacking, and I'll actually go. Sorry, I spoke out of turn. I'll be moving into some examples as we're going. This is obviously the history of where the definitions come from, and moving from computer crime to where it's now referred to as digital evidence. But I'll get to some. But it's
So essentially, computer forensics started with copyright. People taking code that was copyrighted by Texas Instruments and then evolved from there, right?
yeah. Well, it started before the people were swapping out code. It was just Texas Instrument was obviously the landmark case. So yeah, initially it was. People didn't have personal computers back in 1958. So yes, but you're right. It started off with the copyright. Sorry?
You kind of need a crime or somebody feeling they've been wronged to take it to a court case to need data, forensically sound evidence to take before the court. So it's kind of, you need something to go wrong before you can start investigating this. Is this the Computer Trespass Act? Or not sure.
Yeah?
The UK one. They got something like Computer Trespass Act or something.
Well, they've actually, there's a couple of new laws I'm not familiar with, but there's a couple of new laws that's come into effect with cyberbullying and such. So I'm not sure which one this one is.
Okay, cool.
Okay. I thought that the batteries might fail. Does this work? Yeah, that does work. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so further to that, Hensler further expanded this. So I'm just going to wrap these off, not like in a kind of way. Just I already suck with that. So okay, so yeah, fraud by manipulation, computer forgery, damage to or modification of computer data or programs, unauthorized access to computer systems or service, unauthorized reproduction of legally protected computer programs like Microsoft. Okay, so this is on there. The slide pack will be shared, by the way. I just need to put all the correct references in. because I've taken some from some of my previous lecturers. Okay, so moving towards digital evidence. Okay, so in okay, so it was first mentioned back in 96, 97. Okay, and that's when the US Postal Service put a unit together along with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And then they were actually discussing on whether, on what would actually be classified as digital forensics or digital evidence. Okay. Okay, and then it was asked if the same standards should apply. Okay, so now we're starting to see that the questions being asked are why should we be using more like a scientific approach? Firstly, to classify what it is, and secondly, obviously, to analyze it. Okay. And okay. Any questions? Sorry, I'm still nervous. So, any questions? Still with us? Just don't start throwing beer balls, please. Okay, so back in 2000, a clever guy called Ewan Casey. Okay, so a clever guy called Ewan Casey. He's quite formidable in digital forensics. He writes books. Very clever guy, nice guy. Okay, so he took a couple of definitions to actually define what is digital evidence. Okay, and he came up with the hypothesis that it primarily focused on proof and not paying attention to how, to the data itself. Key. Okay, so this is the definition which they came up with. As any data that can establish that a crime has been committed or can provide a link between a crime and its victims or crime and its perpetrators. Okay, cool. So, ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers. This is a document that was written by a guy called Peter Sumner. It gets updated. He's a consultant. This is the guide. He writes a guidebook that you can download. It's basically how to deal with forensic evidence, digital forensic evidence, collecting mobile phones and stuff. So you can download the document and go through it if you're interested. It's I wouldn't say it's an interesting read, but it's a good read if you've got nothing to do, if it's raining outside or something. Okay, so
that's a UK-based one.
That's correct. Absolutely correct. You familiar with it?
A little bit. Yeah.
Okay. But did you read it when you were studying?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's probably the most well-referenced document out there. Okay, so defining cybercrime. Okay, so cybercrime is defining any crime that is committed using a computer, network, or hardware device. Okay. And then there is. I'm still using that. Okay, so there's two types of there's two categories of cybercrime. There's type 1. These definitions are actually from Semantic, the antivirus company. These are generally once-off. Okay. Usually facilitated by malware or cyberware. Keystroke loggers. This comes back to the examples. No, does it answer your question? Okay, software flaws, known vulnerabilities, day zero attacks, etc. Okay, and then there's some additional ones. Okay, phishing, cache poisoning, theft or manipulation of services by hacking or by use of a virus, identity theft, bank fraud, e-commerce, and m-commerce fraud. Okay, and then the second type is a type 2. This is your more serious type of offense, such as cyberbullying, extortion, blackmail, and the likes. Okay, some more examples. Harassment.
Where does ransomware fit in with this?
This will actually fit as a top 2. Yeah. It's blackmail extortion. I don't have it on there. And the planning and carrying out of terrorist attacks. Okay.
Is type 1 and type 2 prosecuted differently?
Well, it wasn't before, but I mean, there's a lot more countries that are actually bringing in laws, like especially with something like cyber. They're becoming quite strict in it because it wasn't really classified as a potentially hurtful crime. So it is prosecuted differently. Obviously, the length of the sentences were different. Obviously, stealing somebody's bank account is completely different to pulling them into context risk. So some people say that it's always been a victimless crime, and now it's actually being seen as a victim. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No.
Obviously, different countries. I mean, it's not just South Africa's looking at the cyber laws, but every country's having their own challenges. I think the European Union is probably dealing with it the best, in my opinion. But even the Americans, I mean, you would think that they'd be on the forefront, but they're also having challenges because computer crime evolves continuously. Sources also, they also evolve continuously. So it is difficult, but South Africa is no different. South Africa is in the same boat as all the other developed countries. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, so yeah, cyberbullying, extortion, blackmail, stock market espionage, and then planning and carrying out terrorism. Okay, so what could be potential sources for digital evidence? Any? Throw some out. Sorry? Log files, oh, for sure. Browser history. Okay. Phones, exactly. GPSs. Anything that's got a chip, basically. Anything that has a type of memory. Sorry?
No, it's browser history.
Browser history, yeah, browser history. No, browser history is a very good source. How to make a bomb. Can't dispute that one. so yeah, browser history.
Yeah, I saw I think like in Google, you have a my activity that Google shows you all the activity that Google collect your mobile phones and browser activity. You can go and see what it is that they collect on you. So if that's already the, let's say, the known activity that Google collects, the other sources of information, there's vast.
Yeah, it's
Somewhere under Google's activity tracking as well, there's they keep track of every single voice command you've ever issued to Google Now. Your recorded voice, you can play it back on their website. You can also manually go and delete it. I don't remember the exact URL for it, but it's somewhere under their logging of your activities. If you have an Android phone with your user account logged in or whatever. So they record everything, basically.
But
You can play it back, yes.
But the thing is, the funny thing is they give you the privacy settings, you can switch it off, but that just means that you can play it back if it's switched on.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're not recording
It's
it.
right there. And it was kind of creepy to hear my own voice.
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean on that topic, sorry.
Oh, just another source of digital evidence is like metadata, like you were talking about,
Sure.
like phone records. So who phoned
Sure.
you? So if bad people phone you, you're a suspect.
Even tampering, I suppose.
Sorry, say
So
again?
there's a good, there was a DEFCON talk about forensic fails where people try to cover up. For instance, like striping your hard drive for zeros is a clear indication that you were hiding something. And by that alone, they threw the guy out of the company because he was hiding, because it was so obvious.
But that opens up a bigger conversation though, because that's also right to privacy.
Yeah, but if you're using company hardware,
I suppose.
It comes down to ownership of those things. It's the same.
Yeah.
I mean, you can if you're married with the community, you can get your wife's call details. It's not illegal if you're married in community.
Okay.
But you're on the topic of Google. The European Union has actually taken Google to task, and the one big thing is that you have a right to be forgotten. So if you delete your accounts and stuff, then you no longer are searchable. So it's not, it is changing. I think people are becoming more aware, especially after the whole NSA thing with the iPhones and that. I think people are becoming more aware that the type of information that anybody could be available to anyone, and I think it is changing. But I mean, Christy raises a good point. You know, it's to say that, not to say that they're still not, they might still be collecting that type of information.
So if you go back about 3 years, Google was doing the street view cars driving around and picking up every open Wi-Fi point that it had along the way, picking up all that information. They got sued for that. And if you look at, like, for instance, Brexit, it's actually interesting because if you consider that the British GCHQ is the most prolific, except for the NSA data capturing apparatus, where a lot of other countries like Belgium, Switzerland, Netherlands, they're all very pro-privacy, protecting privacy. I mean, Pirate Bay has only been around so long because their country is so free, where the British are sort of the opposite of that. And the European Union actually fights for privacy and protections, and getting out is sort of also a good idea if you want to spy on everyone.
I don't know if you see, or I usually see mostly, I think last month's, you know, the little sort of journalists, sort of independent journalists, topical news, South African publications. They had an article on Google. We had a number of the guys quoted in the article, and one guy saying that Google was actually funded by the CIA.
Not
yeah, looking at the guys that were quoting, you had Snowden in there, a number of big names. So I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, if you're looking for data gathering, private commerce is the way to go. You know, you can get people to sign up to it voluntarily.
It's the same conversation with sending an army into a country versus sending black water in. The accountability is much less. Your accountability is only to the stakeholders, to the board, and potentially to your users as they find out. Where a government is accountable to so much more. You've got the judiciary, the voters, there's 100 other things.
Unless you're the UK, you don't even have a constitution.
Cool. No, that's good. Good. Okay, so there's Lime said there's some telephone records. There we go. Okay, emails, internet activity logs. Exactly what you're saying.
Sorry.
Yo.
I see emails under email.
Yeah.
Just given the ease of with which you can modify those things, what is it? Just like anything that looks like an email can be treated as digital evidence? Or?
No, it's look. See, that comes back down to scientific method. Okay, so and you need to prove that. We'll get to scientific method and chain of custody. But I haven't touched on it yet. But what you do with digital evidence is you create a hash code to prove that or when you gather the evidence, we'll touch on it right at the end. But when you gather the evidence, you take a hash code, and that hash code is part of your affidavit, which is submitted to the court. And if anybody takes the same piece of evidence, gets a different hash code, you cannot say that that is exactly the same piece of evidence that you gathered right at the beginning.
Yeah, so that's either the one is like after it's been collected, has it been modified? And I suppose you're going to say the count, or the other argument is, so you collected this from my computer, but some hacker dude or some other person planted it there, right? So normally when you send an email, somebody receives it. So there is actually a check that you can check. Yeah, so I mean, if you check the time stamp that is modified and you see like, whatever, get the server logs and see, yes, the email went through here at that time, and you find the recipient, and the recipient's message matches your computer that sent it, well then your computer definitely sent it. Whether you were the person who sent it using the computer is another kettle of fish, but you know,
Yeah, so I mean, you'll also have exactly what I'm saying is you could have there could be a record on the server. So I mean, the hash code is, I mean, it's you get different types. You download software to make sure that it's actually downloaded correctly. I mean, the chances of you changing a piece of evidence and getting the exact same hash code is it's almost zero chance. I'm not saying it's impossible. It hasn't been done, so it's pretty impossible. There's some smart guys out there. So yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Even if you work for institution in the US with 3 letters, you probably still haven't got it. Okay, so geotagging, this comes back to metadata. Geotagging puts in your GPS coordinates, which is scary really. Just to give you an idea, they went and pulled someone's photo off a social media website, and they actually looked at the metadata. It was metadata put in by a BlackBerry phone. It's on by default. BlackBerry has since changed it, and they actually took the GPS coordinates and drove to the child's school. This is my child on the first day, so I mean, it just shows you what's. I mean, there's people out there that obviously look at this stuff. So I mean, it's scary stuff. But it's just like the same thing as the Google stuff. If you don't know it's on, then I mean, you're not aware of it, right? So it's just to show you, that the information's out there. If you're willing to sift through it or willing to write code to sift through it, I mean, you can probably pull some pretty impressive details, private details. So yeah, people have to be more aware of the information they're putting out, for sure. Okay, GPSs, digital storage device, hard drives, flash drives. Flash drives, incidentally, they tried, in the States, they try to see the easiest way to break into a company. So they dropped flash drives in the parking lot. Employees picked it up, plugged it into the company notebook to see whose flash drive it was, and then they opened a back door for the hackers. So it's not, you can have the best systems in the world. Sometimes the easiest solution to get in is something that thought. I mean, I personally think the guys that think of these 419 scams and stuff, they're intelligent people. If they just applied their mind right, they could achieve so much. And obviously printers.
Even printers are interesting because each printer has a unique watermark actually, and a lot of people have been tried in courts for that.
Right.
I think the Unabomber actually, I can't remember the whole story, but I think part of how they tracked him down was what he printed had a unique watermark on it. So it's pinpointed to some extent.
Well, actually, more surprising than that, you could probably go Google it. It's what they did was they went and bought a company, also in the States. They went and bought, I think, about 12 printers from an auction, and they happened to pick about 5 or 6 that were from a police station. A lot of your big printers have a hard drive. So they took a forensic image of that. They could see people's identity documents, their social security numbers, their copies of their driver's license, medical bills. In the States, obviously, medical details. And on the one printer that they opened, there was actually a paper copy of one of the criminal records, like still on the glass. So, yeah, it's, once again, it comes back to, where's your weakest link. Unfortunately, sometimes it's your staff. I mean, you'd think with the police station, right? they'd be a bit more careful. So yeah, okay, so let's go down to scientific method. Maybe this is where sorry, is there any questions? Cool. Well, thanks for interacting, I love it. Then I don't have to talk. makes it easier on me, less stressful. Okay, so scientific method is this comes down to, if someone takes the same piece of evidence, they need to be able to come to the same conclusion. And everyone, you always, as a digital forensic, or as a forensic examiner, you need to come up with a hypothesis and obviously test that hypothesis. But it's not so much just doing that. You have to test every alternative hypothesis as well, to basically say that the hypothesis that you've posed and the evidence points to is in fact the correct one. because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to be presenting in a court of law or in a civil court or whatever.
Just on that, I don't know how it works in South Africa, but like in the UK, the investigator or the actual forensic expert, there's a separate role. So the forensic expert won't look at trying to decide what's happening, what's when it's guilty, any sort of hypothesis from that side of the point of view, but actually just what's there, what are the facts, and then the actual, what might have happened, was this person guilty, was this person doing something, left up to another party who's not involved in the data collection. So there's sort of separation of duties. He's not an investigator, he's not there to make an opinion.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but that's what comes up to what I'll touch on just now, the CSI effect. But you still present the evidence as an examiner. So you will present the evidence. It's not, you obviously can draw your own conclusions from it.
Present it as CSI tends to look together.
I'll touch on the CSI effect as well. So that's basically the scientific method. Essentially what the scientific method boils down to is that you come to the same conclusion every time you run the test. And obviously with the additions of new digital evidence, a couple of years back you could have said that the iPods, and everything evolves. With smartphones are getting smarter, tablets and stuff. And obviously the way to collect the evidence and to preserve it, analyze it, that also changes. You get live forensics, which analyzes RAM on the computer to get passwords, especially for encryption and stuff, is to pull passwords from a live machine. And there's obviously different scenarios when you would remove power from a machine and not. It's not just the one size fits all, but they have to be tried and tested.
I guess things like cloud have made your lives easier as well. Because now you can't take a physical hard drive out of a server or something like that. Now you're sitting with something digital somewhere that's effectively, potentially in another country.
But a lot of the European and American-based cloud service providers, they will provide you with the stuff if you present them with a portal. But a lot of your file sharing sites are in the Eastern Bloc, so good luck with that. It could be as easy as one person uses the same password for everything. You could get it, as long as you can say how you got hold of the evidence. You need to be able to prove that evidence is what you say it is, and not somebody else's. Sure.
In that case where you say the person used the same password everywhere and you use the password to log in and get the files, how are you going to prove that someone else didn't also use the same password to put the files there?
Exactly. That's the thing. You need to be sure. There could be a locally stored file. So it's a case-by-case thing. But that's not, you're absolutely right. You can go back to browser history. If it's something like Dropbox or something like that, it could be a log in Dropbox that you could
I think
analyze.
you've got to get with any doesn't hold timeline and actually prove that person. Unless that person has an alibi, you shouldn't be anywhere near to do that. The same sort of logic applies to digital crime. Somebody could have tampered with. Is that feasible? Because somebody planted that in my car, in my house. We use the same logic. And you say, somebody else could have got in there.
So, for example, you say there's a person and they've been accused of a crime. You figure out they're using the same password everywhere, and you find they've got this virtual server sitting in the cloud, and you log in using that password. But you go look at the history of all the logins, and since this person was taken to custody, nobody logged in. And before that, see where the logins came from. Oh, they came from the IP that was from his ISP. So unless somebody's logging into his virtual machine from his house, and this is again hypothetical, but if you looked at the evidence, you might find things showing you that nobody else had tampered with it. So
was it really that good?
Yeah, or it's you, the forensic investigator. But you see what I'm saying? You can look for other sources. We're talking about like timelines, looking, okay, this guy is now in jail, waiting his court date. He's obviously not logging in. Nobody else is logged in. The next person logged in is the forensic examiner. Maybe it's under video showing what he's doing, therefore he can't tamper or whatever. Or maybe there's a witness watching what he's doing or whatever. You know, there's always checks and balances.
Okay,
Well,
so
I shouldn't say always. There's the ability or the capability that there could be something that could corroborate what you found. And
the guy behind Silk Roads, Fred Hyder Roberts, he got caught red-handed basically because they, to try and track him, he was very clever because going through the old servers, covered these tracks really well, but they managed to catch him red-handed in a coffee shop, actually on the issue, and otherwise they saying that they were lucky.
I looked back and he'd originally used his actual identity to start publicizing
exactly.
the site, so they could link him that way, and then so they actually went further and further back in time. So when he didn't start off covering his tracks really well.
But you would assume that
If he had, then he wouldn't have caught it with it, basically.
Yeah.
then something that I'm wondering about, what's your opinion about the Tor browser? Because that uses, well, some illegal material can go through your computer, but you're not
sharing or like
you're
knowingly
not an active party except for having the Tor browser.
If you're a
relay.
Yeah,
but if you choose to be a relay, does that make you guilty by default?
So the problem with Tor is that a US court recently ruled that Tor was equal to the definition of malware. Because it facilitated a cybercrime, the hiding of this person's identity.
But that's like saying if somebody who drives a vehicle can ride over somebody, that means everybody who owns a vehicle is all of a sudden guilty by default because they can drive it. Yeah. I understand that, but I'm saying that that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, look, it's a knee-jerk reaction. I mean, I think the British are probably also just as guilty.
The British
if you've got
RIPA, which is ridiculous in that if they suspect you of something, I mean, they can lock you up and demand that you give your password.
Yeah.
And if you don't give your password, and incriminate yourself.
Didn't they want to do the same thing in South Africa?
The problem is that most cyber law is based on Roman law, and Roman law is based on I stole something from you, physical, things. And if you read the cyber law, and it's changed a little bit, but a lot of it was the onus of truth. So you are guilty until proven innocent. I mean, taking the scientific method and everything that we've learned, how correct is that concept that you're guilty even before you've proven it?
I think, look, in South Africa, definitely, I think our constitution is pretty robust. So yeah, I think you've got a lot more liberties.
We have more rights here, for sure.
Yeah, but
For
the
now.
problem is this is a new law that they're trying to push in, where the wording essentially says that you are guilty even before you've gone to court.
That's what I was talking
Like the problem
but
is
they
that
say
there's-
that's against the constitution, so I would never pass.
Again, for
Because
now.
firstly, you have a right to you have a right to be protected. You have a right to be presumed innocent. You have a right to legal counsel. That's in
We
the
can get away with it
constitution.
in the UK because we don't have.
Well, the UK's look is exactly what you're saying. Is if you don't give your password, then you get locked up for 2 years. And you see that's how they're dealing with encryption, because there's no crack for encryption. So that's their answer. But I mean, if you're a paedophile, sure they should shoot you. But if you'd rather go to jail as for not giving your password than go to jail for 15 years being a paedophile. So you need to, I mean, as a criminal, you're going to have to be weighed up to, okay, I'm not giving you my password. But obviously that's their reaction to it. And every country is dealing with it differently. The European Union is dealing with better in the sense that they're trying to do the cross-border investigations a lot better, like setting up databases for cross-border crimes, computer crimes. Forensic scientists have to be registered, they have to maintain the registration. In Holland, it's law by sorry, in the Netherlands by law, you have to be registered with the National Forensic Examiner Board, and you have to give 4 affidavits every year to maintain it. You cannot present evidence in court if you're not registered, and that's how the Dutch are dealing with it. I think it's fantastic. Obviously, because I think we're better off being South Africa, where you are tried by a judge. A judge actually analyzes what's been presented from the prosecution and from the defense. In the States, I mean, a lot of people get off because it's a show, and you've got 12 of your peers. They say it's fairer, but if you look at the O.J. Simpson case, I mean, that was a show, and that's why he got off. And it's the same with Casey Anthony. You know, a judge would probably never have come to that same conclusion. And the same with O.J. Simpson, a judge would never have come to the same conclusion. So, obviously, every legal system is different. Everything, exactly what Chris is saying, everything's based back all the way back to the Roman times, and I think everyone's battling to deal with it. Definitely. Yeah, sure.
Just to go back to the Tor exit node thing. So, if you're running a Tor exit node,
It's
then
the onion router, it's a web browser.
yeah,
Yeah, he does.
Okay, sorry. So you said Tor, like as if
No,
you're
I
like,
said
like,
Tor,
yeah.
like goes in all.
oh, okay, sorry.
Also,
Yeah. So just to go back to that, if you're running a Tor exit node, then
Sorry.
technically you're facilitating information to be passed through secretly or privately, if you prefer. So privacy can be used to keep good things private, and it can be used to keep bad things private. So, I mean, right there, I'd say, well, you know, if you're going to say that's a bad thing, university, it's only going to be used by terrorists and pedophiles. What about whistleblowers, you know, and people trying to do good things with it, like journalists? Hang on a sec. So I would think it would fall under very much the same category of running an ISP.
People
If you're running an ISP, say again?
People selling curtains.
Yeah, like
Yeah, but I mean,
you know,
the point.
you can close the curtains
Yeah.
and do nasty private things.
I think like eventually you're going to be tried under the same laws as an ISP because
Yeah.
you're facilitating traffic.
And there is some existing laws in certain parts of the certain parts of the world, certain countries of the world, where they talk about I think it's open carrier, I think it's in the States, safe harbor provisions. So, as I recall, as long as they will respond to a warrant and provide you know, information on a particular user when there is like a warrant from the court, then they're all right. Or, for example, if there's a copyright infringement, if like it's being hosted on one of their servers and distributed, as long as they actually respond to that and say like, okay, like, whoa, 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 Mr. Subscriber, you should not, or Mr. Subscriber, whoever, you should not be sharing this copyrighted information, then they're in the clear. If they say no, we're not going to stop this person from doing it, we're not going to shut down this file sharing, then they're facilitating a crime at that point. So, yeah, you see what I'm saying? It's a hairy, tricky balance or tricky argument to make either way. But yeah.
So on the Tor question, right, for facilitating traffic, like if you remember, Bitcoin was used in Silk Road quite prolifically. Every time Bitcoin transactions done, the network does a validation of the traffic and get consensus on that. Are you then party to that crime? If you're running a Bitcoin miner that actually validates the traffic that was used on the Silk Road?
I would say no, but I'm not trying to like convict everybody and pull everyone into like a dragnet to get my way to convict this guy with the bad guy.
If you knew that transaction was coming from Silk Road, would you then veto that transaction?
But how would you know that?
You couldn't.
Yeah.
Well,
But Tor is the same.
Exactly.
Tor is the same.
Yeah.
But here it comes down to something, while we were busy working against the cyber law, working with, what's his name?
Last time?
Yeah, with him, because he's an advocate. The interesting things he said, for instance, was what he deals with like Audrey Standard, for instance, in court. They'll have a forensic expert. But the problem is that the other experts, other people bring in is a guy with a Microsoft certification, the first level, I can't remember what it's called. Yeah. Or the other problem is that we are still in a very much like, you know, I said the Roman law, our court systems are still paper, right? Very much still
digital evidence
paper-based.
has to be presented on paper.
And we're talking digital forensics, digital being the key word, but you have to get your digital evidence onto paper, take it to court and explain it to a judge.
you just print my hard
He
drive
still
again.
struggles to get all his emails in the right place, and Outlook goes down every now and then, he gets hacked. I mean, I know a girl who's a candidate attorney, and And the other day they got like whatever hacked or whatever. Like her explanation was very vague, but I mean, like if you want to target anyone, target the lawyers, right? Because they don't know shit. But you have to like
That's an
the truth,
acronym.
Right? Like
Research
you
one.
have to do your job so properly because it's going to go on paper as evidence.
There's another question I actually wanted to ask. There's a scientific method. Does it help to peer review?
Well, that's the thing. That's what scientific method is that it's
Reproducible.
it has to be reproducible. But yes, it has to be peer reviewed. That's the whole thing. It must be. You must be able to do it time and time again.
Kind of CSR forensics with the DNA and stuff. Apparently they don't hold that.
What's what now?
I've seen an article on South African forensics basically saying
All right.
that the forensic staff.
Okay, but what you see, there's something that's called the Dobit effect, so which actually software has to be done through that because of there was a case against the Dobit versus pharmaceutical. It was against a pharmaceutical company, and it proved that basically the software was not peer reviewed. So, and that's exactly what happened in the Casey Anthony case. Was that she got off because the investigator could not explain what a certain value was from that the software was kicking out.
I think that's why like tools like Encase are popular because they've gone through.
She actually used Encase, by the way.
And there's only, you can't just come and say, I've written this tool to extract this, look, it shows this guy's guilty. If you're going to use a method to present data in court, it has to be a method that you've tested, that you're shown to be accurate. So using tools like Encase, although it's not particularly great, it's not the best, it's been tried and tested. They use, they've gone to the trouble of actually saying this will stand up in court. This is good. So yeah, tools like that.
Yeah, look, a discussion on software that could be a discussion on its own, to be honest. But yeah, Encase is one of the big ones. Another one is access data. You get open source. I mean, that's also a discussion about licensed forensic tools compared to open source. But you see, that's where the Dobit effect comes in. Is that the results of peer review and stuff. So, yeah. Sorry, you had a question.
On a case-by-case basis, the evidence is not shared.
No, not a case by case. But the method you're using.
Yes. I mean,
the methods you're using.
That's much the problem with anything, right? In academics, things are peer reviewed. It gets kicked around in academics for 5 years. The industry picks it up. Awesome, let's do that. 10 years, 15 years down the line, this is a crap idea. Let's go look at academics again. Okay, cool. This new language is going to solve all our problems. 10 years down the line, I hate it. Let's go find something else that's been kicked around in academics for 5 years, right? I mean, look at concurrency in programming. Like, how many different theories are there just on that? And different programming languages doing pseudo-concurrency, real concurrency, threading.
Well, he's absolutely right. I don't know why you're looking at me. I agree with you. It's the same as a book. I mean, how long does it take to get a book published? How long does it take to get a technical paper published? I mean, you can churn out a technical paper tonight and submit it to a conference or to a journal tomorrow. It will be peer reviewed. But if you put that in a book, it has to get an editor, and it gets thrown back and forth. And that's exactly what you're saying. I mean, to get a book published is the cycle's a lot longer than to get a paper published. But I mean, obviously, you've got peer review panels that do specifically for conferences and journals, but obviously you target the ones that are more widely accepted than the others. I mean, you can send me your paper, I'll peer review it. But I mean, if you send it to a well-known digital forensic conference, it's going to carry more water, especially because it's being peer reviewed by people that are leaders in the field. And it's like that in any field. So yeah, I don't know if can we go on? Is there any other questions? I love it. Any other questions? Cool. Okay, so this is the flow of scientific method. We're going to go to a video now after this. So, got the question, observation, hypothesis, test the hypothesis. If it proves true, you can support the hypothesis basically using try to test it scientific method. You write a report. If it doesn't, then you go back to and review the hypothesis. And this happens a lot more with newer technologies because it's not to say that it worked before. It might not work so in your software or whatever. So it's not a it's not an open loop. So it's almost like a closed loop, especially the hypothesis part, where you're testing your theories and stuff. And validating. Once again, validation, reliability. Two main things that your evidence has to correlate to. Okay, so tying all that stuff in. This was never intended for what it is, but I thought back to the CSI effect you touched on. Okay, so CSI effect, obviously named after the program, CSI. I think we have to Jerry Bruckheimer, executive producer. He's obviously killed off the franchise, so we have to tweet him, tell him it's not a crap. Bring it back. Okay, so but it ties back to what you're saying. Is that a criminal investigator does everything. Goes to the crime scene, takes swabs of blood, does the blood spatter analysis, does the digital forensics, goes out to the field, gets shot at, dives over a hedge, shoots the perpetrator. Brilliant. I mean, shit, these guys are very good shots. The poor police guy in the patrol car gets shot for some unknown reason. He's not one of the main characters. Yeah, so that's basically what it is. It's what you see on TV is actually what it's like, and it's not really like that. Okay, so it's a specialized job, like anything. I mean, someone is specialized in blood spatter analysis, like Dexter. I'm not saying go kill a criminal, but I mean just to give you like a popular culture reference. Okay, so yeah, that anybody can do it, like Daniel can do it. He's an IT person. So yeah, so there's specific. I mean, obviously you need to follow specific methods, like taking hash code and stuff like that. Because obviously you can dispute the evidence. I mean, that's right. And just get better experts than what the prosecutor has. One example of that is coming back to proving that something was opened. Someone was dismissed for watching porn on their computer, but they proved that the file was never actually opened on the computer. It was just malware. So that file was never actually viewed on the computer. It was just obviously a pop-up, closed. So the time period was too short. The person was reinstated. So, I mean, you do, and then that's the thing, is you need to look at the evidence and present it. So it's questions. You. Awesome.
Yeah, I wanted to
On the
say,
slide.
okay, they saw that a video was only for a certain amount of time, but what software logs the amount of time that a video is open?
You look at well, that's the thing, coming back to, you said in-case. In-case access data. So it's forensic software. You don't actually look at the real, you don't look at don't look at the original evidence. You take a copy of the evidence and you actually analyze the copy of the evidence. And then you can go through all types of logs, whatever logs.
You can look at the modification time and then the access time.
Access time, last accessed.
Okay, but that only shows when it was opened, not for how long.
Yeah, but if you've got modification time, last access time, and it's the same time, and it's never been accessed again, like.
Also, many video players will potentially save your last point of that file to go back.
Yeah, it also depends on the operating system. I mean, like Microsoft, they've got recent files. I mean, it's seen as temporary recent files, but I mean, it's not really temporary because you can go and look at your recent files. I mean, that could be a file that's 3 months old if you haven't opened many files on that system. And then also, okay, there's another discussion on its own. We've got file slack, which is space. It's not the file itself; it's space after the file that contains information. You can carve files. So if a file has been partially overwritten, obviously a file gets written to can be written to multiple sectors. A portion of that file could have already been overwritten with new data, but you can still carve maybe evidence from what is still remaining, say an image or a file or whatever. And obviously that's what you present. But obviously the two comes back down to you need to prove that it is what it is. If you can explain why you had to carve it, that's also good. Obviously you need to explain why half the files are there or 2/3 of the files are there. Okay, so CSI effect. This is also the one people looking at phones and stuff. That's not forensically sound because we used to say that you didn't go and surf on the guy's phone for how to make a bomb. So yeah, that's not forensically sound. So you would actually take an image of the phone and you'd analyze the contents of the image, not the actual phone itself. You'd have to put it in a Faraday bag. There's obviously different procedures to deal with different types of evidence, how to collect it, how to analyze it, how to store it, and then how to report on it. Okay, chain of custody. Anybody want to take a stab at what chain of custody is? Chain of evidence, also referred to as chain of evidence. Yeah. Read it off the board.
Some sort of record that shows who handled the evidence.
Yeah, well, basically, it's a timeline of what's it all ties back to, is the evidence what you say it is? Like for instance, if it's a knife used for a murder, who says that knife is the knife that was used for the murder, and how was that knife handled from when it was collected at the crime scene to when you present that?
So it's a real world log.
It is. It's a paper trail. Sometimes it could be disputed. So yes, it's exactly. It's a trail. To say the evidence is what it is. With digital evidence, you would catalogue it because, and I think it ties back to what you're saying, is that the person doing the triage when they're collecting the evidence is not necessarily the same person that's going to be analysing or writing up the report. Okay, so it's okay. Yeah, it's documentation is a critical component. So you say that in your affidavit you would write that this person contacted you. Obviously, it needs to be done legally, right? So you're given a court order or whatever. You collected the evidence, took the hash codes, and obviously everything's documented. The original original device was put in storage. You analysed the evidence so that if anyone, you don't do analysis on the live or on the original evidence because you're going to change it. Booting a machine, you're changing the file structure. You're changing access times. So you can't do that because you're changing the evidence. And it all comes down to, is it what you say it is? Okay. Okay, and this is probably the thing is that the simplest thing is to prove with hash codes. Now, the hash code was 501, it is now 501. It is the same evidence that I collected, it's been documented, hash codes are correct. Okay.
Does metadata affect hash codes?
Metadata is part of it. Look, the hash code is the complete entirety. It will contain your metadata. For instance, like I said, you do a hash code on a Word document. It will contain your metadata. If I go and change anything of that metadata, the hash code is going to change.
The file name doesn't.
No, well,
you can hash the file name if you want to.
Changing the file name will change the hash code.
Changing the file name changes the metadata, which changes the hash code.
You can take an image of like a file system or partition, and you can run a hash code on that. You'll get a hash sum, and voila. Start changing
anything on it.
Even opening the file and accessing it will change the hash code.
It will change the metadata.
Yeah,
it will change the hash code.
It's sharp 256, is that?
That's an example of
but
a.
I've definitely I've changed the file name and it has the same sharp 256.
You're probably using Windows.
So you've hashed the contents of the file.
Yeah, contents of the file.
So don't only hash the contents of the file is the answer to your question.
Okay, cool. I didn't know about that.
Okay, so that's that. Okay, almost done. Any questions?
Okay.
Okay, so this is a forensic process, pre-examination phase, examination phase, post-examination phase. It's pretty slow. And then You've got within your different phases, you've got subcategories: pre-examination phase, legal authority, obviously, it's your wife. So yeah, you obviously have authority to do it. Civil cases, you need an Anton pillar. You can't just go and collect somebody's notebook. But it ties back into what you were saying about whose the property it is. Working for a company, it's the company's property. So that's a tough one. And I understand you have a right to privacy, but it is still the company's notebook. So if you're doing something that's against the company's policy, you don't really have a leg.
Yeah, well, considering if it's like under policy, then it's understandable.
Look, they're not going to go after you because they don't like you.
Yeah, yeah.
There's obviously,
I mean, that can open up a whole lot of legal problems for many people involved.
Exactly. Okay, so yeah, legal authority, identify legal elements, digital evidence, devices, acquisition, authentication, hash codes. Key. Examination phase. You have to confirm the examination parameters. You can't just go on a fishing trip. See, okay, well, this guy's not guilty of, okay, 12 points probably. The guy's not guilty of fraud. Let's see what else he's guilty of. While we've got the evidence, you can't do that. You can't go and search for anything. If the person's only, for argument's sake, cyberbullying, being charged with cyberbullying, say lying, you can't go and look at who else has been cyberbullied. It's not without, it's out of the parameters.
I don't know if this would be an exception to that rule. If you were, say, just like a computer repair guy in a shop, and you took somebody's laptop and you found child porn on there, you have a duty in the UK,
It's the same in South Africa.
to actually report that, and if you don't,
You're liable, just as liable, yeah.
So, I mean,
no, he's absolutely right. It's the same in South Africa. Even as a forensic investigator, if you are investigating a crime, even for fraud, and you find child porn, you have to stop. You're not even allowed to. You're not even allowed to have that in your possession.
yeah.
You have to take it to the police.
It's sort of back to classic law with the court order, right?